My name is Eleanor Wilson. I'm 68 years old, and my son and his wife invited me to a reconciliation dinner, only to drug my whiskey to steal my $4.5 million business. 30 minutes after I escaped, the police were arresting them both. It sounds like the plot of a thriller, doesn't it? I wish it were. When it's your own life, your own family, the story takes on a much darker shade. I'm still processing it all, even now. I'm telling this story because I think it's important to talk about these things. I'd love to know where you're all watching from and what time it is for you. Drop me a comment below. For me, this nightmare began on a perfectly normal Tuesday afternoon. The kind of quiet day that gives no warning of the storm to come. The silence in my house was a living thing. It had weight and texture. For 45 years, this brownstone in Brooklyn Heights had echoed with life. It had absorbed the sound of my husband Thomas's booming laugh, the frantic patter of our son Michael's toddler feet, the endless debates over menu changes, and the clinking of glasses with friends. After Thomas's funeral 3 years ago, the house had exhaled all that life and settled into a profound quiet. A quiet that magnified the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Each tick, a metronome marking my solitude. I spent most of my days in my home office. It was my command center, a beautiful room lined with books overlooking the East River. The glittering Manhattan skyline was a constant, reassuring presence. From this desk, I ran the Wilson Restaurant Group, 7 locations, each with its own identity, each a thread in the tapestry Thomas and I had woven together. On the corner of my desk, in heavy silver frame, was my favorite photo of him. He was on the deck of our old boat, squinting into the sun, a wide, genuine smile on his face, the kind that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. Some days, I'd talk to the photo, asking for advice I knew would never come. The business was my anchor, my purpose. We'd started with a single greasy spoon diner fueled by a small loan and an obscene amount of youthful optimism. We'd poured every dollar and every waking hour into it. Now it was a recognized brand, a legacy, an inheritance for our son. At least, that had always been the plan. But the plan had gone awry. My relationship with Michael, our only child, had been disintegrating for a year. It wasn't a sudden break, but a slow, agonizing corrosion. The final fracture had happened over money. He and his wife, Vanessa, had approached me for $200,000. They were vague about the details, calling it a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity. I'd paid for Michael's entire college fund, which he'd treated more like a party fund. I'd bailed him out of 2 failed startups and a mountain of credit card debt. My instincts, honed by decades of navigating the treacherous waters of New York business, screamed that this was another black hole. I asked for a business plan, for specifics. Vanessa had bristled, her eyes narrowing. "It's complicated, Eleanor. It requires trust. Don't you trust your own son?" "Trust has nothing to do with it, Vanessa. This is a significant amount of money. A smart investment is backed by data, not just hope." The conversation devolved from there. Vanessa accused me of being controlling, of treating Michael like a child, of clinging to my money as if I could take it with me. Michael had stood by, silent and passive, his failure to defend me a tacit endorsement of his wife's poisonous words. That was the last time we'd spoken. A year of deafening silence, punctuated only by a soulless, pre-printed Christmas card. So, when my phone buzzed that Tuesday afternoon, displaying Michael on the screen, my heart performed a painful, complicated maneuver. I let it ring, once, twice, a third time, taking a deep breath to steady the tremor in my hand before I answered. "Hello, Michael?" I said. My voice was a carefully constructed wall of neutrality. "Mom, it's me." His voice was thin, hesitant, and coated with an unfamiliar layer of contrition. "Listen, I know it's been a long time, and I know things ended badly. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. Vanessa and I, we miss you. We were wondering, we'd love for you to come to dinner on Friday at our new place. We really want to make things right. A new place? The last I'd heard, they were struggling to make rent on a cramped two-bedroom in Queens. A treacherous, foolish hope began to bloom in the barren landscape of my heart. It was a mother's hope, a weed that can grow in the most inhospitable soil. I glanced at Thomas's smiling photo. He was the eternal optimist, the peacemaker. "He's your son, Ellie. You have to try," I could almost hear him whisper. But the CEO in me, the woman who could spot a padded invoice from a mile away, was sounding a 5-alarm fire. "That's quite a surprise, Michael," I said, choosing my words with care. "I didn't realize you had moved." "Yeah, we just did. It's in Westfield, New Jersey. It's a great place, Mom. You'll love it." Westfield. The name landed like a stone in my gut. An affluent, exclusive suburb known for its sprawling homes and eye-watering property taxes. The alarm bells were clanging now. How on earth could they afford Westfield? "All right, Michael," I said, the mother in me making a decision my gut was screaming against. "Friday sounds fine. Send me the address." After we hung up, the silence of the office felt different. It felt charged, heavy, with unspoken questions. I swiveled in my chair and looked out at the city. Then I did what I always did when I was navigating a situation without Thomas. I called Jessica Reed. Jessica was more than just my lawyer. She was the closest thing I had to a daughter. Her father had been our first attorney, a gruff, brilliant man who had guided us through our early years. Jessica had inherited his sharp mind and his fierce loyalty to our family. "Westfield," she exclaimed after I told her the news. Her voice was a whip crack of disbelief. "Eleanor, that's insane. Michael and Vanessa have been living paycheck to paycheck for years. Did he win the lottery?" "He said his new consulting business is doing well." I could practically hear Jessica rolling her eyes. "His consulting business has consisted of him giving his friends bad fantasy football advice. Something is not right. Be careful." "I know, Jess, but he's my son. He said he wanted to reconcile." "I hope he does," she said, her tone softening. "I truly do. But hope is not a business strategy, Eleanor. Go as the CEO of Wilson Restaurant Group, not just as Michael's mom. Keep your eyes open and your checkbook closed. And you call me the second you leave that house. I want a full debrief." Her words solidified my own swirling anxieties into a concrete plan. I would go, but I would go prepared. I went down to the climate-controlled wine cellar, a small indulgence of Thomas's. In the back, on a special shelf, was a bottle of Macallan 25-year-old single malt scotch. It was his pride and joy, a bottle he was saving for a monumental occasion, the day Michael finally got his life on track, or perhaps the birth of a grandchild we were beginning to think would never come. I took the heavy, dust-covered bottle in my hands. It felt sacred. I would bring this as my peace offering. But it was more than that. It was a test, a barometer of their sincerity. If their intentions were pure, they would understand the significance of the gesture. If they weren't, well, the reaction to a $5,000 bottle of whiskey would surely tell me something. The drive out of Brooklyn and into the manicured perfection of suburban New Jersey felt like crossing into another country. I left behind the familiar, chaotic energy of the city, the symphony of sirens, the vibrant street life, the grit and the history, and entered a world of silent, sweeping lawns and identical, oversized houses. As I turned onto Michael's street, I felt a growing sense of dislocation. When I pulled into the driveway of the address he'd sent, I had to put the car in park and just stare. It wasn't a house, it was a statement. A starkly modern monolith of white stone and dark glass, it sprawled across the double lot with an aggressive kind of luxury. The landscaping was so perfect it looked artificial. A gleaming black Porsche, so new it still had the temporary plates, sat in the driveway as if it were posing for a magazine. A wave of vertigo washed over me. This wasn't the result of a consulting business taking off. This was something else entirely. This was sudden, explosive wealth. And that kind of wealth rarely comes from honest work. It comes from a windfall, a lucky gamble, or something far darker. My hand hovered over the gear shift. I could just put it in reverse and drive away. I could call Michael and claim a sudden illness, but I couldn't. I had to know. My need to understand was now stronger than my fear. Clutching the cold, heavy bottle of Macallan, I walked up the slate pathway to the imposing front door and rang the bell. The door swung open to reveal a young woman in a simple black dress, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had large, dark, expressive eyes that seemed to hold a deep-seated worry. "Good evening," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You must be Mrs. Wilson?" "Please, Eleanor is fine," I said, trying to offer a reassuring smile. Before the young woman could respond, Vanessa materialized behind her, a whirlwind of silk and expensive perfume. "Mother, you made it! We're so happy you're here." She swooped in for an air kiss that landed somewhere near my ear. "Don't mind Maria," she said with a flick of her wrist toward the young woman. "She's just helping us out." As I stepped into the cavernous two-story foyer, I handed my coat to Maria. As she took it, her hand brushed mine. It was ice cold. She seemed nervous, fumbling with the coat. At a small console table by the door, a half-full glass of water sat precariously on the edge. As Maria turned, her elbow accidentally knocked it over. Water splashed onto the sleeve of my cashmere coat. "Oh my goodness, I am so terribly sorry, Mrs. Wilson," she gasped, her eyes wide with what looked like genuine panic. She grabbed a cloth napkin from the cable and began frantically dabbing at my coat. Her movements were flustered, her apologies profuse. In the midst of the small, chaotic moment, as she was bent over my coat, her eyes darted to my open handbag sitting on the console. I saw them flick to the leather business card holder inside, just for a fraction of a second. It was a look of intense, desperate focus. Then it was gone, and she was just a flustered housekeeper again. "It's perfectly all right, dear. It's just water," I said, patting her arm. And then, looking at her face more closely, a flicker of memory ignited. "You know, you remind me so much of a wonderful woman who worked for me years ago. Martha. She was the head chef at my very first restaurant, the Brooklyn Grill. An incredible talent." Maria froze, her hand still hovering over my coat. She looked up and the professional mask was gone. Her eyes were filled with a sudden, shimmering emotion. You remember my mother?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Of course I do," I said warmly, the memory of Martha's fiery passion and incredible cooking flooding back. She was a one-of-a-kind, a true artist. How is she? A veil of sadness fell over Maria's face. "She passed away, ma'am, 2 years ago. Cancer." "Oh, my dear girl, I am so deeply sorry to hear that. My heart aches for you. She talked about you sometimes. She said you were tough, but you were fair. You gave her a chance when no one else would." "She earned that chance 10 times over," I said softly. In that shared memory, a fragile but potent connection was forged between us. "Mom, stop monopolizing the staff and come see the house," Vanessa called out, her voice brittle with impatience. She looped her arm through mine, and her grip was surprisingly strong and pulled me away from the foyer. "Maria, get Mrs. Wilson's bottle and bring it to the dining room." As Vanessa steered me on a tour of her cold, sterile palace, I couldn't shake the look I'd seen in Maria's eyes. It wasn't just sadness for her mother, it was fear. We found Michael in the living room, which was the size of my entire ground floor. He was staring out a floor-to-ceiling window at the unnaturally blue, illuminated swimming pool. He looked haunted.
The dark circles under his eyes were more pronounced in person. "Mom," he said, turning. He came forward and gave me a brief, stiff hug that felt more like a formality than an embrace. "I'm glad you came." "This is quite a home, Michael," I said, looking around at the soulless, expensive furniture. "It's amazing, isn't it?" Vanessa beamed, clinging to his arm. "Michael's new consulting business is just exploding. He's a genius." I looked at my son, giving him an opening to explain, to say anything that made sense. He just offered a weak, fleeting smile and looked away, toward the dark garden. I presented the bottle of Macallan. "I brought this. I thought we could celebrate new beginnings." When Michael saw the bottle, a flicker of something genuine crossed his face. It looked like shame. He knew what that bottle represented. He knew the unspoken promise Thomas and I had attached to it. Vanessa, on the other hand, saw only its value. "Oh, Eleanor, you shouldn't have," she gushed, taking the bottle from me with an eagerness that was almost vulgar. "This is incredible. We'll open it right away." As she led the way to the dining room, I glanced back down the long white hallway. Maria was standing there, watching us. Her face was pale, her expression a mask of profound worry. Our eyes met across the distance. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a clear, silent warning. Then Vanessa called my name, and I turned away. The image of Maria's frightened face burned into my mind.
The dining room was dominated by a long, glass table that could have seated 20. We were 3 people, lost in its vastness. The meal that followed was technically flawless, clearly the work of an expensive caterer. Seared scallops with a saffron risotto, a perfectly cooked filet mignon with a red wine reduction, and a ridiculously complex dessert involving a sphere of chocolate that melted when hot caramel was poured over it. It was a performance of food, not a meal meant to be shared. Vanessa, naturally, held court. She chattered endlessly about their new life, name-dropping neighbors, and complaining in a backhanded way about the cost of maintaining the pool. It was a monologue of wealth, designed to impress and intimidate. Michael said almost nothing, mechanically cutting his steak into smaller and smaller pieces until it was a pile of mangled flesh. He ate little. "So, Mom," Vanessa began, leaning forward with a predatory gleam in her eye as Maria silently cleared the main course plates. Her tone shifted from frivolous to focused. "We were talking the other day, Michael and I, and we're a little worried about you." "Worried about me?" I asked, setting my fork down. "I'm fine, Vanessa." "Oh, we know you are," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "But you work so hard. You're in that office every day. You've been running that empire for decades. Don't you ever think about slowing down, enjoying the fruits of your labor?" "The business is what I enjoy," I said flatly. "It's not just a job." Of course," she purred. "But it's just so much for one person to handle. And, it's so important to have a solid succession plan in place. For the future, you wouldn't want everything you and Thomas built to end up in some stranger's hands after you're gone." The word hung in the air between us, cold and sharp. Michael flinched as if he'd been struck. "My lawyer and I have a very comprehensive estate plan, thank you. Every contingency is accounted for." Vanessa's smile tightened for a fraction of a second before she recovered. She reached for the Macallan. "Well then, a toast to your foresight," she said with false brightness. "To Eleanor." She poured a generous 2 fingers of the amber liquid into my heavy crystal tumbler. The whiskey, which should have been a symbol of reconciliation, now felt like a prop in a play I didn't understand. I took a sip. The smoky, peaty flavor was exquisite, but it was tainted by the acrid taste of the conversation. They were relentless about keeping my glass full. After the first glass, I felt the familiar, pleasant warmth spread through my chest, but Vanessa topped it up before it was even half empty. After the second full glass, a strange and unwelcome sensation began to creep over me.
It wasn't the gentle buzz of good scotch. It was a thick, syrupy fog that seemed to be settling over my brain. My head felt heavy, my thoughts sluggish. I had been a connoisseur of fine spirits for most of my adult life. My tolerance was legendary among my friends. This was wrong. This was not a normal reaction. I looked over at Michael. He was staring intently at his own glass, swirling the whiskey, but never drinking it. He was deliberately avoiding my gaze. The knot of unease in my stomach began to twist into a cold spike of genuine fear. "You know, Mom," Michael said abruptly, his voice sounding high and strained, "Vanessa is just incredible with finances. She's a natural. She's been managing all of our new investments, and the returns have been amazing." "Is that so?" I said. My own voice sounded distant, as if it was coming from the other end of the long table. I had to concentrate to form the words. "Yes," Vanessa jumped in, seizing the opening. "I was thinking, since you're so busy, maybe I could just take a look at the books for the group. As family, I'm sure I could find some efficiencies, streamline some things, just to take some of the pressure off you." The spike of fear in my gut became a full-blown alarm. They weren't just making small talk about retirement. This was a coordinated attack. They were making a direct play for my business, my life's work, Thomas's legacy. The room seemed to tilt, the expensive chandelier swaying slightly. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. And then, a lifeline. Under the table, my phone vibrated in my purse. My fingers felt thick and clumsy as I fumbled in my purse. I pulled out the phone, squinting to bring the screen into focus. The bright light was a physical assault on my eyes. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, panicked bird trapped in a cage. With a trembling thumb, I opened the message. The words swam for a second, then snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. "High-dose sedatives in the whiskey. Act drugged. They have papers in the office for you to sign. Get out when you can." The blood in my veins turned to ice water. The syrupy fog in my brain didn't just clear, it was blasted away by a hurricane of adrenaline and pure, cold terror. It was Maria. It had to be. The spilled water, the glance at my business card. It wasn't an accident. It was a desperate, brilliant move. She had gotten my number. She was warning me. Every piece of the evening clicked into place with the sickening finality of a coffin lid. The ostentatious house, the probing, greedy questions, the whiskey they kept pushing on me, the whiskey Michael wouldn't touch, his averted eyes, Vanessa's predatory smile. This wasn't a reconciliation dinner. It was a meticulously planned ambush. A wave of white-hot rage, so intense it made me dizzy again, surged through me, but I shoved it down, deep down into a cold, dark place in my gut. Panic was a luxury I could not afford. Hysteria would get me nothing. The text message was my only advantage, and it had given me instructions. Act drugged. My life, my entire 45-year legacy, now depended on my ability to give the performance of a lifetime. I let my head loll to the side, a dead weight on my neck. I blinked slowly, deliberately, as if I were struggling to keep my eyes open. I let out a soft sigh. "Oh my," I slurred, amazed at how convincing my voice sounded, breathy and thick. "I feel suddenly so sleepy. That whiskey is much stronger than I thought." I watched them through my eyelashes. I saw the look that passed between them. It was a shared glance of pure, unadulterated triumph. They thought they had me. The fish had taken the bait. "You've had a long week, Mom," Vanessa said, her voice a disgusting parody of gentle concern. She rose from her chair and glided around the table. "You just need to rest for a little while. Here, let us help you to the living room. You can lie down on the sofa." I allowed my body to go limp, a dead weight, forcing them to take my full measure. I felt Michael's hesitant hands under one arm, Vanessa's firm, impatient grip on the other. The physical contact was revolting. My son, whose hands I had held as he learned to walk, was now leading me to my slaughter. His wife, a woman who had once called me Mom, was his co-conspirator. I focused on their touch, on the feeling of their skin against mine, and I channeled that revulsion into my performance.
They half carried, half dragged me into the cavernous living room and deposited me on the enormous, cold leather sofa. I let my eyes flutter closed, forcing my breathing into the deep, even rhythm of sleep. I was no longer Eleanor Wilson, grieving widow and hopeful mother. I was a strategist. I was a spy in my own life. Is she out? I heard Vanessa whisper, her voice sharp and urgent. I think so, Michael replied. His voice trembled. Van, are you sure about this? This feels really wrong. Don't you dare go soft on me now, Michael, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. It's either her business or you go to prison, or worse. Have you forgotten what Petrov said he'd do to your kneecaps? He wasn't joking. Now go get the damn papers. Petrov? A loan shark? Prison? The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture of desperation so profound it had led them to this. They weren't just greedy. They were trapped animals, chewing off their own limbs to escape. And I was the limb they had chosen to sacrifice. I heard Michael's reluctant footsteps retreat down the hall, then return, the telltale rustle of thick paper. Okay, Vanessa said, her voice low and businesslike. Let's get this done. We'll guide her hand. If that doesn't work, we'll use her thumbprint on the witness line. My friend in notary services said it's legally murky, but better than nothing. I lay there, a statue of feigned unconsciousness, my mind racing, calculating, planning. I had to get out. But how? The front door was a football field away, in full view of the living room. They would see me in an instant. I needed a diversion. I needed an opportunity. I needed it now. Lying on that sofa, I was a general planning a campaign from deep within enemy territory. My body was the battlefield, and my mind was the command center. I focused on my breathing, keeping it slow and rhythmic, the perfect imitation of a drug-induced slumber. But beneath that calm exterior, my thoughts were a flurry of strategic calculations. I was a cornered animal, yes, but I was a wolf, not a sheep. I had built a restaurant empire in the most competitive city on earth. I had stared down union bosses, out-negotiated landlords, and managed hundreds of difficult personalities. I would not be undone by my feckless son and his sociopathic wife. My escape route was clear. The kitchen. The back door. It was my only viable option. But to get there, I needed to create a diversion. Something loud, something chaotic, something that would draw their attention completely away from me, if only for a few crucial seconds. I listened to their hushed, frantic whispers. They were arguing now, their nerves beginning to fray. Just put the pen in her hand, Vanessa ordered. She's not moving at all, Van. What if we gave her too much? Michael fretted. The pharmacist said it was a standard dose for someone her size. He said she'd be groggy and suggestible, not comatose. Stop whining and do it. This was my chance. I let out a soft, guttural groan and shifted my weight on the sofa, a restless movement in a deep sleep. Thirsty, I mumbled, the word sick and slurred. Water. So thirsty. I heard Michael let out a sigh of relief. I'll get her some water, he said, clearly grateful for any excuse to postpone the forgery. I heard his footsteps retreat towards the kitchen. One down, one to go. Now for Vanessa. I had to get her away from me. I began to twitch, my hand jerking, my leg kicking out slightly, as if in the throes of a bad dream. What is she doing now? Vanessa whispered, her voice sharp and urgent. Maybe she's having a reaction to the drug? Michael called out from the kitchen. It's not supposed to do that, she snapped back.
This is a mess. I let out another, louder groan, and this time I mumbled a name, a ghost to haunt them. Thomas. Thomas, where are you? That did it. I felt a change in the energy in the room. The invocation of my dead husband, the powerful patriarch whose legacy they were actively trying to desecrate, seemed to spook them. Just hurry up with the water, Vanessa yelled at Michael, her voice strained. While her attention was divided, her eyes darting between my twitching form and the hallway where Michael was, I knew this was my moment. I had to create the ultimate distraction. I summoned every ounce of my strength and focused it into one decisive movement. I rolled my body hard to the side, my arm flailing out and connecting with the tall, slender, and absurdly expensive-looking floor lamp that stood beside the sofa. It teetered for a moment, then crashed on the marble floor with a sound like a bomb exploding. The lampshade crumpled, the bulb shattered, and a piece of the ceramic base skittered across the room. "What the hell was that?" Vanessa shrieked, jumping back from the sofa as if it were electrified. Michael came running from the kitchen, a glass of water in his hand. "What happened? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything. She did. She knocked over the lamp. Is she waking up?" In that beautiful, perfect moment of chaos, their full attention was on the wreckage of the lamp and my unconscious body. They were looking at the distraction, not the target. I opened my eyes. My path was clear. I didn't hesitate. I slid off the far side of the sofa, away from them, keeping my body low to the ground. The drug was still in my system, my head pounding, and my limbs felt like lead, but the adrenaline was a raging fire, burning away the fog. I crawled on my hands and knees, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I could hear them still arguing, their voices a rising tide of panic. "We have to do it now, before she really wakes up. Get the papers." I reached the end of the sofa and risked a glance. The hallway to the kitchen was clear. I scrambled into it, my stockinged feet making no sound on the polished floor. The kitchen was brightly lit and empty, save for one person. Maria was standing by the back door, her hand already on the doorknob. She had heard the crash and understood. Our eyes met across the gleaming stainless steel island. No words were necessary. An entire conversation passed between us in that one silent glance. Gratitude, fear, understanding, and a shared resolve. She pulled the door open just enough for me to slip through into the damp night air. She closed it behind me with a soft, final click. I was out. I was free. The cool, wet air hit my face, and it felt like the first birth of my new life. I didn't look back. I ran, stumbling across the perfectly manicured, wet lawn, my only thought to get to my car, my sanctuary. I fumbled in my purse, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key in the lock. I slid into the driver's seat, hit the lock button, and finally let my head fall against the steering wheel, gasping for air like a drowning woman who had just broken the surface. I had escaped. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the war had just begun.
The cocoon of my Mercedes offered a fragile sanctuary. The engine was off, the only sound the frantic drumming of my own heart and the ragged gasps of my breathing. My body began to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable shuddering, a delayed physical reaction to the terror I had just endured. But as the initial shock began to recede, it wasn't fear that washed over me. It was a grief so profound, so soul-shattering, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, threatening to crush me. I rested my forehead against the cold, smooth leather of the steering wheel, and I began to cry. These were not the quiet, dignified tears of a grieving widow. This was a raw, primal storm of sorrow. It was an ugly, wrenching sound that tore itself from my throat, the sound of a mother's heart breaking. My son, my Michael, the tiny baby I had rocked to sleep, the little boy whose scraped knees I had kissed and bandaged, the teenager whose chaotic emotions I had tried to navigate. That boy,
my only child, had just tried to drug me and steal my life's work. The betrayal was not an abstract concept. It was a physical agony, a gaping wound that I knew would never truly heal. I saw flashes of his life, a cruel slideshow in my mind. Michael at 5, so proud of the lopsided clay ashtray he'd made me for Mother's Day. Michael at 12, scoring the winning goal in his soccer championship, his face alight with pure joy. Michael at his college graduation, the one I'd paid for. A whole college fund I diligently saved, his future a bright, shining promise. Where did that boy go? When did the light in his eyes die, replaced by the desperate, greedy darkness I had seen tonight? Thomas, I whispered into the darkness of the car, the name a ragged plea. What do I do? What would you have done? I thought of my husband, of his unwavering moral compass, of the fierce pride he took in our name, in the legacy we had built together. He would have been shattered by Michael's betrayal, but he would not have been weak. He would have been furious, yes, but his anger would have been cold and focused. He would have been strategic. He would have protected our legacy. He would have protected me. After what felt like an eternity, the storm of grief passed, leaving in its wake a cold, hard, desolate calm. The sobs subsided. I sat up and wiped my tear-streaked face with the back of my hand. The mother in me was grievously wounded, perhaps mortally. But the CEO, the survivor, the woman who had clawed her way to the top of a man's world, was now in control. Panic is a fire that consumes you. Anger is a fire you can wield. I chose to wield the anger. My first raw instinct was to dial 911 and bring the full, crushing weight of the law down upon them, to see them dragged out in handcuffs. But then Jessica's voice, calm and rational, cut through the emotional haze in my head. Call me the second you leave. She was right. A hysterical 911 call from a woman who had just been drugged would be chaotic. It would be my word against theirs. They would paint me as a confused, vindictive old woman, perhaps suffering from dementia, angry about not being given money. I needed more than an accusation. I needed a strategy. I needed my lawyer. I found her number in my contacts and pressed the call button. She answered on the first ring, her voice alert. "Eleanor, are you all right? What happened?" "No, Jess. I am not all right." My voice was eerily flat, stripped of all emotion, and then in a low, steady monotone, I told her everything. The opulent house, the insidious questions, the drugged whiskey, Maria's life-saving text, the terrifying performance of feigned unconsciousness, the crash of the lamp, the silent escape. I left no detail. Jessica listened, her silence a testament to the gravity of the situation. When I finally finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing. "Jesus Christ," she finally breathed out. "Eleanor, okay, listen to me very carefully. Where are you right now?" "In my car, a few blocks away from their house." "Good. Do not go home. Do not call the police. Drive to my office in the city, right now. I'll meet you there. I can be there in 20 minutes. "What do we do, Jess?" "We," she said, and I could hear the shift in her voice, the concerned friend replaced by the formidable attorney, "are going to build a cage of evidence so tight and so perfect that they will never, ever get out." An hour later, I was sitting in Jessica's sleek, minimalist office on the 40th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. The city lights glittered below, a beautiful, indifferent backdrop to the ugliest night of my life. She handed me a cup of strong black coffee, and its bitterness helped to ground me. Telling the story a second time, in that sterile professional environment, stripped it of some of its emotional chaos and revealed it for what it was, a sequence of calculated criminal acts. "We have your testimony, which is powerful," she said, pacing in front of her wall of law books. "But their defense will be to discredit you, to paint you as unstable. That's why we need Maria. She is the corroborating witness. She is everything." I gave her the burner phone number Maria had used. She dialed it immediately, putting the call on speakerphone. "Hello?
Maria, my name is Jessica Reed. I am Eleanor Wilson's attorney, she said, her voice a perfect blend of authority and compassion. Eleanor is with me in my office, and she is perfectly safe. I want you to know that you are a very brave, very admirable young woman. I heard a choked sob of relief from the other end of the line. I was so scared. I didn't know if she got away. Are they... Did they... They did not succeed, Maria. Thanks to you, I said, my own voice thick with a gratitude that felt bottomless. Jessica took control of the conversation. Maria, I need you to be brave for just a little while longer. I need you to tell me everything you know about the plan, the whiskey, the reason they were so desperate. I need you to know that I am recording this call for legal purposes. What you say now can help protect Eleanor, and it can also protect you from any legal repercussions. Hesitantly at first, then with a growing confidence fueled by her own sense of justice, Maria recounted the whole sordid tale. She confirmed it was a powerful sedative purchased from a shady online pharmacy. She told us about the loan shark, a brutal man named Petrov, and the staggering $2.3 million debt Michael had accrued through a series of disastrous gambles on the stock market. She described the legal documents she had seen laid out on Michael's desk, a full transfer of ownership of the Wilson Restaurant Group, with complete places for my signature. She told us how they had been planning it for weeks, how Vanessa had been the driving force, mocking Michael for his weakness.
When she finished, Jessica ended the recording and looked at me, her eyes gleaming with a fierce, predatory light. "That's it," she said softly. "That's the nail in their coffin. The corroborated testimony of an eyewitness to the conspiracy." She leaned against her desk. "Okay, Eleanor, now we have a choice. We can take this recording and your statement, hand it all over to the police, and let the justice system do its work. It will be effective, but it will be slow and messy. Or," she paused, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face, "or we can write the final scene of this drama ourselves." I looked at her, and I understood instantly. She wasn't just talking about legal strategy. She was talking about power, about justice, not the cold, impersonal justice of a courtroom, but the deeply personal, satisfying justice of a woman taking back her own narrative, of a queen returning to the board to declare checkmate in person. "What exactly," I asked, a sliver of ice forming in my own veins, "do you have in mind?" The drive back to the gilded cage in Westfield was a study in transformation. The first time I had made this journey, just a few hours earlier, I had been a mother clinging to a fragile thread of hope. Now I was a woman forged in betrayal, my heart encased in a layer of cold, hard resolve. I was no longer the prey escaping the trap. I was the hunter returning to the scene with my most trusted counsel. Jessica sat in the passenger seat, a silent, formidable presence. On the drive, she had made one quiet, efficient phone call to a senior detective she knew at the Westfield Police Department, a man named Miller. The stage was being set. Detective Miller and his team would be waiting, parked discreetly down the street. They would not move until they received the signal from Jessica. The opening salvo, the psychological blow, had to be delivered by me. As we turned onto their street, we saw them. Michael and Vanessa were in the midst of a full-blown, panicked argument on their perfectly manicured front lawn, illuminated by the harsh glare of the landscape lighting. "Where could she have possibly gone? Her car is gone," Vanessa was screeching, her voice a shrill instrument of fury. "She was practically comatose. People don't just get up and drive away from that dose." "I don't know," Michael yelled back, frantically running his hands through his hair, a man unraveling in real time. "Maybe the dose was bad. What if we killed her, Vanessa? Oh my God! What if she's dead in a ditch somewhere? We'd be facing a murder charge." "Don't be such a dramatic idiot," she snapped, her contempt for him palpable even from a distance. "The point is, she's gone, and those papers aren't signed. Petrov's deadline is noon tomorrow. We are finished." It was at that precise moment that the silent, powerful headlights of my Mercedes swept across them, pinning them in the beams like startled animals. They froze, their mouths agape, their argument dying in their throats. They watched in stunned silence as my car pulled smoothly into their driveway, parking right behind the ostentatious Porsche. They watched as I, the woman they thought was either dead or incapacitated, emerged from the driver's side, followed by Jessica, who got out of the passenger side carrying her leather briefcase like a weapon. The color drained from their faces in unison. They looked like statues, sculpted from fear and disbelief. "Mother," Michael finally guessed, taking a stumbling, involuntary step forward. You're okay. We were so worried. We looked everywhere for you. We thought—" "You thought what, exactly, Michael?" I asked. My voice was unnervingly calm, cutting through the damp night air. I didn't stop to engage with him. I walked right past him, my heels clicking on the slate pathway, heading for the front door of his ridiculous house as if I owned it. I walked into the living room. The shattered lamp still lay on the floor, a testament to my escape. I ignored it. I sat down on the very sofa they had laid my drugged body upon, crossing my legs at the ankle and placing my hands calmly in my lap. Jessica stood beside me, a silent, formidable presence. Her presence radiated an authority that Vanessa and Michael clearly lacked. "What is this? Who is this woman?" Vanessa demanded, having found her voice. She followed me into the house, pointing a trembling, accusing finger at Jessica. "Vanessa, Michael, I'd like you to meet my lawyer, Jessica Reed. I felt it was prudent to bring her along for this next part of our family reunion. It seems we have some rather urgent business to discuss." "Business?" Michael stammered, his eyes darting nervously between me and Jessica. "Mom, what's going on?" "Well," I said, leaning back into the cold leather and fixing him with a level gaze, "it seems I left rather abruptly, before we had a chance to conclude our transaction. I'm referring to the papers, of course, the ones you were so eager for me to sign, the ones that would have gifted you the entire Wilson restaurant group. I thought we should probably talk about that." The silence that descended on the room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of guilt and fear. Vanessa, who I had always known to be quick-witted and sharp-tongued, simply stared at me, her mind clearly scrambling for a foothold on a cliff face of lies that was rapidly crumbling beneath her. Michael, on the other hand, looked like a man who had just been told his execution was imminent. He couldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at a point on the floor, his whole body trembling. "You're confused, Eleanor," she finally managed, her voice a pathetic attempt at the condescending tone she usually employed so effectively. "You had far too much to drink tonight. You were talking nonsense before you wandered off. You're not making any sense at all." "Am I?" I replied, raising a single eyebrow. The simple two-word question hung in the air, challenging her, daring her to continue the charade. "I do feel a bit foggy. Perhaps you're right. Jessica, my memory is so hazy. Could you possibly clarify the events of the evening for me?" Jessica, on cue, stepped forward. She didn't say a word. She simply opened her briefcase, took out her smartphone, and placed it with a soft, deliberate click on the center of the marble coffee table that separated us. The small black rectangle sat there, like an unexploded bomb. "I believe this might be illuminating," Jessica said, her voice cool and precise. "It is a legally obtained recording of a phone call I made with your housekeeper, Maria, less than an hour ago. She was most forthcoming." I watched Vanessa's face as the meaning of Jessica's words sank in. It was a fascinating and terrible thing to behold. The mask of defiant indignation cracked, shattered, and fell away, revealing the raw, writhing panic beneath. It wasn't just my word against hers anymore. There was a witness. There was proof.
Maria describes the entire conspiracy in what I must say is remarkable detail, Jessica continued, her voice relentless, each word a hammer blow against their crumbling defense. She talks about the high-dose sedatives you procured from an online pharmacy. She mentions the rather substantial $2.3 million debt you owe to a gentleman by the name of Petrov. And, most damningly, she describes the legal documents she saw you prepare, The ones waiting on the desk in the other room, ready for a signature from a woman you believe to be drugged and legally incapacitated. Shall I press play? That was the tipping point. That was the moment the dam of their deception broke. Vanessa, stripped of her lies and her manipulations, reverted to her true nature. She was not a sophisticated schemer. She was a feral animal, and cornered, she turned on the weakest member of her pack. She whirled on Michael, her face a grotesque mask of fury. "You!" she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "This is all your fault. You and your stupid, pathetic gambling debts. I told you she wasn't some senile old fool. I told you we needed a better plan, but you were too much of a coward." And there it was. A full, glorious, and unsolicited confession screamed for all to hear. Michael didn't even seem to register his wife's attack. Faced with the irrefutable proof of his betrayal, and now the venomous contempt of the woman for whom he had committed it, he simply broke. The last vestiges of his manhood, of his pride, evaporated. He stumbled forward and collapsed at my feet, grabbing for my hand like a drowning man grasping for a piece of driftwood. His touch was repulsive, but I forced myself not to recoil. I made myself look at him, at the pathetic, sobbing creature he had become. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he wept, his words a choked, incoherent mess of self-pity. "I didn't want to do it. She made me. Petrov, he was gonna hurt me, Mom. He was gonna hurt you if I didn't pay. Oh God, Mom, please, you have to forgive me, please." I looked down at the top of my son's head, at the man who was now kneeling before me, begging for an absolution he could never earn. For a fleeting, painful moment, the mother in me felt a pang of pity. He was weak. He was pathetic. He was a man who had been consumed by his own failures. But pity is a cheap and useless emotion, and it is not the same as forgiveness. Forgiveness is a grace, a gift, and it must be earned. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled my hand from his grasp. Forgiveness is a complicated thing, Michael, and love is not an excuse for monstrous behavior. What you did tonight, what you were willing to do to me, your own mother, that is a debt that can't ever be repaid, not with tears and not with money. I stood up, towering over them both, the screaming, hysterical wife and the sobbing, broken husband, the architects of their own magnificent ruin. "You were right about one thing, though," I said, looking directly at Vanessa. "I am not a senile old fool." Then I turned my gaze to Jessica and gave a single sharp nod. "I believe our business here is concluded." Jessica walked calmly to the grand front door and pulled it open. "Detective Miller," she said, her voice clear and steady, projecting into the quiet night. "I believe my client is ready to make her formal statement now." Detective Miller was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a rumpled suit, with the tired, patient eyes of someone who has seen the worst of human nature and is no longer surprised by it. He and two uniformed officers stepped into the house, and their calm, professional presence instantly transformed the scene from a messy family drama into a formal crime scene. The air crackled with a new kind of tension. The sight of actual police officers in her living room seemed to shock Vanessa into a new level of hysteria. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "This is a private family matter. You have no right." "Ma'am," Detective Miller said, his voice a low, authoritative rumble that effortlessly cut through her shrill protests. "Attempted poisoning, conspiracy to commit fraud, and elder abuse are not family matters. They are serious felonies. Now please sit down and be quiet." The authority in his voice was absolute. Vanessa, perhaps for the first time in her life, did as she was told. She sank onto a chair, her mouth clamped shut, her face a mask of disbelief. The process that followed was methodical and chillingly efficient. One officer began taking my formal statement, his pen scratching across his notepad as I recounted the events of the evening for the third and final time. Jessica stood by my side, interjecting only to clarify a legal point.
The other officer, guided by Jessica, went directly to Michael's office and retrieved the stack of legal documents. He then bagged the whiskey bottle and my glass as evidence. The case against them was being assembled, piece by irrefutable piece, right before their eyes. I watched as they read Michael and Vanessa their Miranda rights. The familiar words from 1,000 television shows sounded profoundly different when spoken in your own presence, directed at your own child. You have the right to remain silent. The irony was almost too much to bear. Their silence had been their weapon against me for a year. Now, it was their only protection. I saw a flicker of movement at the large picture window. I glanced over and saw the curtains of the house next door twitch. A neighbor, no doubt, drawn by the commotion, was getting the gossip of a lifetime. The public humiliation, the stripping away of their carefully constructed facade of wealth and success, was a fitting appetizer for the main course of justice that was to come. They put my son in handcuffs. The metallic click of the cuffs locking into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. As they led him toward the door, he looked back at me one last time, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading question. I met his gaze. I did not offer him a tear, a nod of reassurance, or a flicker of maternal pity. I let him see the full measure of what he had done. I let him see the vast, cold, empty space where my love for him once was. I gave him nothing, and then he was gone. After the police cars had pulled away, taking the wreckage of my family with them, the house fell into a profound silence. It was in that quiet that Maria emerged from the kitchen, where she had been hiding. She looked at me, her large, dark eyes filled with tears and 1,000 unspoken emotions. She didn't say a word. She just ran to me, and for the second time that night, I was held. She wrapped her arms around me and hugged me with a strength that belied her small frame. I held her tight, this brave young woman, this near stranger who had shown me more loyalty, more decency, more family than my own flesh and blood.
"You saved my life, Maria," I whispered into her hair, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "You saved everything I've ever worked for." "You were kind to my mother," she sobbed against my shoulder. "She never forgot it. She always told me, 'Good people are rare, Mija. If you find one, you have to protect them.' I just did what my mother taught me to do." Standing there in the opulent, soulless house that had been the stage for my betrayal, I understood something fundamental. Family isn't just about blood or a shared name. It's a verb. It's about loyalty. It's about respect. It's about showing up. It's about the quiet, everyday acts of kindness and courage that build a bond stronger and more real than any legal document or accident of birth. Jessica came and put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Let's go home, Eleanor." I nodded, my tears finally starting to fall, but these were not tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude and release. I knew exactly where home was. It wasn't my empty brownstone. It was a feeling of safety, of integrity, of being true to myself. And tonight, against all odds, I had fought for it, and I had won. The weeks that followed were a surreal whirlwind of legal meetings, police statements, and sensational headlines in the local papers. Brooklyn restaurant queen drugged by son in multi-million-dollar inheritance scheme. It was humiliating. Every time I stepped out of my house, I felt the phantom weight of strangers' eyes on me, their minds filled with the sordid details of my family's implosion. But I refused to hide. I had done nothing to be ashamed of. I held my head high, attended my meetings, and ran my business with the same focus I always had. I would not be defined by their crimes. The legal case against Michael and Vanessa was airtight. Faced with the evidence and Maria's unshakable testimony, they had no choice but to plead guilty to a slew of charges, including conspiracy to commit fraud and felony assault.
Their assets, including the ridiculous house in Westfield, were seized to deal with the loan sharks and other creditors. They were each sentenced to 15 to 20 years in a state penitentiary. The legal system had done its job. Justice, in its cold, impartial way, had been served. But my journey, the journey of a mother, was far from over. About a month after the sentencing, I did one of the hardest things I have ever done in my life. I went to visit Michael in prison. The visiting room was a drab, soulless place that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Seeing my son, the boy I had raised, shuffle into the room in a faded orange jumpsuit, his face pale and his eyes hollowed out, was a unique kind of torture. We sat opposite each other, separated by a thick pane of scratched plexiglass, and spoke through a crackly, static-filled speaker. He cried, of course. He apologized profusely, the words tumbling out in a torrent of self-pity. For a long time, I just listened, my face impassive. I didn't offer him comfort. I didn't offer him easy absolution. Why, Michael? Not the money. I understand desperation. But why me? Why this way? Why the poison? He couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at his hands, twisting them in his lap. Because it was Vanessa's plan, he whispered, his voice barely audible. She said it was clean. She said you wouldn't feel a thing, that you'd just wake up and it would be over. She said it was the only way. I was a coward, Mom. I was weak. I let her convince me that you were the obstacle, instead of seeing that she was the poison. She may have been the poison, Michael, but you chose to serve it. I let that hang in the air between us. I saw the truth of it land, a final devastating blow. I don't hate you, Michael. And I was surprised to find that it was true. The fire of my anger had burned itself out, leaving behind only ashes and a profound, weary sadness. I don't recognize the man sitting in front of me. The boy I raised, the boy Thomas and I loved, would never have been capable of this. You have a long, hard road ahead of you. Not just in here, I said, gesturing vaguely at the grim prison walls around us, but in here, I tapped my chest. You need to use this time. You need to find that boy again. You need to become a man your father would have respected. Do it for your own sake, not for mine. That is the only thing I can offer you right now. I didn't promise to visit again. I didn't promise forgiveness. I simply promised him the lingering hope of a mother that he could, one day, become a man worthy of it. It was the best I could do. It would have to be enough. Leaving the prison that day, I didn't feel happy, or relieved, or even vindicated. I just felt finished. A long, painful chapter of my life had finally closed. Now, it was time to write a new one. Healing, I discovered, was not a passive process. It was an active one. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about building something new on the foundations of the old. I threw myself back into my work, but with a renewed sense of purpose. I had always been a good boss, but now I made a conscious effort to be a better leader. I spent more time in my kitchens, talking to my chefs, tasting their creations, listening to their ideas. I started a generous promotion track and a profit-sharing plan for my senior managers. My staff weren't just employees. They were the guardians of my legacy, and I treated them as such. I reconnected with the friends I had neglected. I let Jessica drag me to a yoga class, which I hated, and a wine tasting tour, which I loved. I took a month-long trip to the Amalfi Coast, something Thomas and I had always dreamed of doing. I sat on a sun-drenched terrace overlooking the sea, sipping limoncello, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of profound peace. I was learning to enjoy the silence again, to fill it not with loneliness, but with contentment. The most important part of my healing, however, came from creating something new. I used a portion of my own funds to establish the Thomas Wilson Culinary Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing scholarships and seed money to young aspiring chefs from disadvantaged backgrounds. I was transforming my pain into someone else's opportunity. One of my first official acts as the head of the new foundation was to call Maria. I asked her to meet me for lunch at my flagship restaurant, the Wilson in Brooklyn Heights. She arrived looking nervous and uncertain, dressed in a simple but elegant dress. She looked different from the frightened housekeeper I had last seen. There was a new confidence in her bearing. I led her to my personal table, the one in the quiet corner with the best view of the bustling open kitchen.
Maria, I began after we had ordered, I've said it before, but I need to say it again. What you did for me was an act of courage that I will never be able to fully repay. The word thank you feels small and inadequate for what you gave me. I just did what was right, Mrs. Wilson, she said, her voice still quiet, but steady now. I know, I said, meeting her eyes. And in this world, Maria, doing what is right, especially when it is difficult and dangerous, is the rarest and most valuable quality a person can possess, which is why I have a business proposal for you. Her eyes widened in surprise. A proposal? For me? I am not offering you a job, Maria, I said, leaning forward, my voice low and serious. A job is something you can lose. I am offering you a future, an opportunity. I am launching a new subsidiary of the Wilson Group. It will be a high-end consulting firm specializing in training front-of-house staff and management for luxury hotels and restaurants. I want you to be its first director of operations. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, completely speechless. The starting salary will be $90,000 a year with full health benefits and 4 weeks of paid vacation, but more importantly, I am giving you a 10% equity stake in the new company. It will be yours, something you can build, your own legacy. Tears began to stream down her face, but this time they were not tears of fear or relief. They were tears of overwhelming, life-altering joy. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say you'll accept, I said with a warm smile. I've learned a valuable lesson, Maria. I don't give second chances to people who betray my trust, but I invest everything I have in those who have proven their loyalty. I am not just giving you a position, I am investing in your character, and your character is flawless. She accepted, of course, and in the year that has passed since that lunch, Maria has proven to be one of the shrewdest and most successful investments I have ever made. Her company is thriving, and she has become a sharp, compassionate, and brilliant executive. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in my quiet office looking out at the glittering city lights, and I talk to Thomas's picture. I tell him about everything. I tell him about the terrible pain of Michael's betrayal, but I also tell him about the incredible strength I discovered within myself, a strength I never knew I possessed. I tell him about the foundation, about the talented young chefs we are helping. I tell him about Maria and how her quiet courage reminds me so much of his own integrity. I tell him that I finally understand what our legacy truly is. It's not the money in the bank or the number of restaurants we own. It's not a name on a building. It's the values we lived by. It's the integrity we fought to maintain. It's the loyalty we inspired in good people. The awful events of that night nearly destroyed me, but instead, they forced me to understand what was truly worth fighting for. My story is a painful one, but it is also a story of survival, of taking back control, and of realizing that your true worth
is not defined by the betrayals you suffer, but by the courage with which you rise from them. Thank you for listening to my story.